Jamal had always felt a little different, but this was something else. It was his first day at his new school, and he felt every pair of eyes in the hallway on him as he walked to his classroom. The school was much larger than his old one, and everything seemed unfamiliar, from the towering lockers to the loud chatter echoing through the halls. Jamal walked through the front doors, his heart pounding in his chest. He was a tall, athletic 16-year-old, but today, his height didn't give him any comfort. This wasn't just any school, it was a predominantly white school in a quiet, mostly suburban neighborhood. His family had just moved here, and Jamal could feel the stares even before he stepped into the classroom. When he entered the room, it was no different. A few students glanced up from their desks and immediately looked away, while others whispered behind their hands. Jamal had dealt with being the new kid before, but this felt different. This was his first time in a school where he was the only black student. He took a seat at the back of the class, hoping to avoid standing out. His nerves made him feel like everyone could hear the rapid beat of his heart. He didn't know anyone here, and the pressure to fit in weighed on him like a heavy backpack. The teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was a kind-looking woman with short blonde hair, and she welcomed him with a warm smile. "Welcome, Jamal. We're happy to have you here." Her voice was cheerful, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching him. The students' stares were sharp, and it made his skin crawl. He wished he could shrink into the seat and disappear, but instead, he forced himself to sit tall. The lesson began, and Jamal tried to focus. It was history class, and they were learning about the Civil War. Jamal knew this material well, so he raised his hand to answer a question when Mrs. Peterson asked about Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. To his surprise, the room went quiet. A couple of students turned around to look at him, their eyes filled with curiosity, but no one responded to his answer. He felt the awkward silence stretching on, and a few students exchanged glances before quickly turning back to their notebooks. Jamal sank back into his chair, his face turning red from embarrassment. He knew this feeling all too well. Being different wasn't new to him, but this time, it stung more. He tried to shake it off, hoping the rest of the day would be better. But as the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the whispers began. The group of boys at the back of the room, who had been laughing during the lesson, exchanged sly smiles. Jamal caught their eyes for a moment, but quickly looked away. He wasn't in the mood to deal with their comments. The next class, English, was a little better. The teacher was more focused on the lesson, and Jamal found it easier to blend in. But even in English class, things weren't as smooth as he'd hoped. As Jamal walked in and found his seat, he noticed that the desk he was supposed to sit at had a backpack in it. No one was sitting there, but the desk was clearly occupied. A few of the boys in the room, including Todd, the leader of the group from history class, were watching him from the corner of their eyes. Jamal hesitated for a second, unsure if he should ask to move the backpack. He didn't want to make a scene, but he also didn't want to stand in the doorway looking lost. He glanced at the teacher, but Mrs. Andrews was busy handing out papers. Slowly, he walked over to the desk, planning to just move the backpack. But before he could, Todd spoke up from the back of the room. "Hey, what are you doing with my stuff?" Todd's voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Jamal froze for a second, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. I just need to sit here," Jamal said, trying to sound calm. Todd grinned and shook his head. "Nah, man. That's my seat." He laughed, his friends joining in with snickers. Jamal looked around, his heart racing. No one seemed to care about the situation. It was just him and Todd was clearly enjoying the attention from the rest of the class. Jamal stepped back, not sure what to do next. Mrs. Andrews finally looked up, sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking between Jamal and Todd. "He's trying to take my seat," Todd said, pointing at Jamal with a smirk. Mrs. Andrews blinked, clearly surprised. "Todd, that's not necessary. Jamal, you can sit anywhere. Go ahead." She waved her hand toward an empty desk in the corner, trying to diffuse the tension. But Jamal could tell she wasn't fully aware of what was happening. The group of boys at the back, including Todd, exchanged knowing looks, and Jamal felt his stomach tighten. He didn't want to be the center of attention again, but it seemed like it was happening whether he liked it or not. After that moment, things didn't get any better. The rest of the day went by in a blur of awkwardness. During lunch, Jamal sat at an empty table, hoping to get some peace. But it wasn't long before Todd and his friends showed up. They took the seats around him, their conversations loud and full of jokes that Jamal didn't understand. They talked about sports and video games, but their laughter seemed forced when it came to Jamal. The next few days followed the same pattern. Every time Jamal tried to sit down, the bullies would make fun of him or move their bags to take up extra space. Todd started sitting next to him in class, making comments about how cool Jamal's accent was, mocking him with every word. At first, Jamal ignored it, but it wasn't long before the comments started to get to him. He could hear them whispering behind his back, and the whispers turned into full-blown taunts whenever he tried to do something as simple as ask a question in class. One day, Jamal's frustration boiled over. He had finally had enough. He'd been patient, trying to ignore their teasing, but the thought of sitting at the back of the class again made him sick. It wasn't right. His mind raced with anger, and before he knew it, he was standing up. He turned to face Todd, who was sitting in the desk ahead of him, grinning like he had won some sort of game. Jamal could feel his heart pounding in his chest. But before he could speak, he saw a familiar figure in the doorway. It was his father, looking serious in a suit and tie, his eyes scanning the room. Jamal's breath caught in his throat as he realized his father had come to school to talk to someone. The presence of his father was enough to make Todd and his friends pause. They froze, their smug smiles slipping for a moment as they looked from Jamal to the tall, authoritative man standing in the doorframe. Jamal's father, known to everyone in their community for his powerful connections, made his way into the classroom. The tension in the air thickened. The boys, still unaware of his influence, looked at each other nervously. Jamal stood there, frozen in place, and for the first time in days, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. His father had arrived, and with him came the promise of things finally being different. The days after the incident with Todd and his friends felt like a blur to Jamal. His father's sudden appearance at school had shaken him, but it also gave him a sense of security he hadn't felt before. Still, he didn't fully understand why his father had come to the school. The next day, when Jamal woke up and got ready for school, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. His father hadn't said much about what had happened at school the day before. It was clear that something had changed, but Jamal didn't know what. He was worried that Todd and his friends would continue their taunts and bullying. When he stepped onto the school bus, it was the same as always. The students were talking, laughing, and gossiping, but no one seemed to notice Jamal at first. He sat down, trying to look normal, but as the bus rumbled toward the school, he felt the familiar eyes on him again. As he got off the bus and walked into the school, it was hard to shake the feeling of being watched. The first class of the day was history, and Jamal tried to sit quietly in the back as usual. The room was filled with chatter as the other students came in. Todd and his group of friends walked in together, as they always did. This time, though, something was different. Todd didn't look at Jamal with the usual smug expression on his face. Instead, Todd's eyes quickly flicked away, and he took a seat at the front of the room. Jamal noticed that Todd wasn't the only one acting strangely. The other boys in the group were also acting a little too calm, too careful around him. Jamal felt a sense of unease wash over him, and for the first time, he started to feel like something had truly shifted in the school. He glanced over at Todd, who was now sitting in his usual seat, but his attitude was completely different. Todd didn't say anything to Jamal. He didn't make any jokes or sarcastic comments like before. In fact, he didn't even look in Jamal's direction. It was as though Todd and his friends were all trying to avoid him. The teacher, Mrs. Peterson, began the lesson, and Jamal tried to focus. He was relieved that the bullying seemed to have stopped for now, but he couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Why had things changed so suddenly? Was it because of his father's visit to the school? Jamal had never seen his father act like that before. It was as if he had a presence that made people nervous. Jamal knew his father was powerful, but he had never seen his influence in action before. The way the bullies had backed off so quickly made Jamal uneasy. He wasn't sure if he should feel grateful or worried. As the day went on, Jamal started to notice more strange behavior from the other students. They weren't making fun of him, but they weren't exactly friendly either. It was as if they didn't know how to act around him anymore. The girls in his class, who had ignored him before, started to smile awkwardly whenever they caught his eye. The boys who used to whisper behind his back now gave him wide berths, as if they were afraid to say anything at all. Jamal felt like an outsider, even more than before, but in a different way. It wasn't that they were being openly rude to him, it was that they were treating him like a mystery, something they didn't understand. Lunchtime came, and Jamal sat alone at his usual spot in the cafeteria. He had hoped that things would be normal again, but it seemed like no one knew how to act around him. His classmates had always been a little distant, but now they were actively avoiding him. It was like they were all afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. He noticed Todd and his group sitting together at the far end of the cafeteria, talking in low voices. Todd glanced over at Jamal a few times, but each time he quickly turned his head. The other students were eating their lunches, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Jamal couldn't help but feel like he was the subject of some silent conversation that he wasn't a part of. A few minutes into his lunch, Jamal was startled when a girl named Emily came up to him. She was one of the students who had smiled awkwardly at him earlier in the day. Emily was shy, and Jamal had noticed her sitting alone a lot. She wasn't part of the group of students who had been mean to him, but she also hadn't exactly been kind before. Today, however, she walked over to Jamal with a hesitant smile. "Hi, Jamal," she said quietly, almost as if she were nervous to speak to him. Jamal looked up at her, surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to speak to him, especially not someone like Emily. "Hey," he replied, unsure of what to say. He was still trying to figure out why Emily, of all people, was talking to him now. I just wanted to say that I think it's unfair how the others treated you," Emily said, glancing over at Todd's group. "I know they've been giving you a hard time, but, well, I think you deserve better than that." Jamal blinked in surprise. He had never spoken much to Emily, and he had never expected her to defend him. It felt strange to hear someone actually standing up for him. "Thanks," Jamal said, not really knowing what else to say. "I guess. I just don't know what to do about it." Emily nodded, her face full of sympathy. "You're a good person, Jamal. Don't let them get to you. And, if you ever want to talk or sit with me, you can. I don't mind." For the first time since he had arrived at the school, Jamal felt a little warmth in his chest. Emily's words weren't a solution, but they were a sign that not everyone was afraid of him. He wasn't invisible, at least, not to everyone. That afternoon, things continued to be strange. Jamal walked from class to class, feeling like he was under some kind of invisible scrutiny. Todd's group of friends no longer made fun of him, but they didn't make him feel welcome either. Jamal didn't know what was going on, but he had the feeling that something big had changed in the school. When the school day finally ended, Jamal didn't rush to leave. He walked out of the building slowly, taking in the quiet of the afternoon. His mind was spinning with thoughts of his father and the way things had shifted so suddenly. His father had always kept a low profile, never letting anyone know the full extent of his power or influence. But now, it seemed like his father's reach had made a difference. Jamal wasn't sure how, but the bullies were backing off, and the school seemed to be treating him differently. But why? And how long would it last? Jamal walked to the bus stop, lost in thought. The weight of the situation was starting to settle in. Whatever had happened, Jamal knew that he was no longer the same. Things were changing, and he wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. He just had to wait and see. The next few days passed by in a strange haze for Jamal. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off, even though the bullying had stopped. It was as if the air around him had shifted, but no one was talking about it directly. He still felt the weight of the stares and whispers, but now, instead of mockery, there was an undercurrent of something else: uncertainty. People weren't sure how to treat him anymore. Todd, who had once been the loudest voice in the classroom, had become quiet. The usual taunts had stopped, replaced with tense silence whenever Jamal entered a room. His group of friends, who used to laugh at his expense, no longer made jokes. They still glanced at him sometimes, but now it was more out of curiosity than anything else. Jamal was no longer the target of their cruel remarks, but that didn't make him feel any better. He wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or uneasy. In class, Jamal tried to focus on his studies, but his mind often wandered. He couldn't help but think about his father and the way things had changed. The way his father had come to the school without warning still confused him. Jamal had never known his father to be a man who drew attention to himself. His father was someone who worked in the shadows, making things happen from behind the scenes. Jamal had always respected his father for that quiet power, but he'd never seen him use it like this. What did it all mean? His father's visit to the school had clearly made an impression, but Jamal wasn't sure if it was a good one. He didn't want to be treated differently just because of who his father was. He wanted to fit in on his own terms. And yet, he couldn't deny the sense of protection that came with his father's influence. It was like an invisible force that had changed the atmosphere in the school, making the bullies think twice before coming near him. One afternoon, during lunch, Jamal decided to sit in the same spot he always did, hoping for some peace. The cafeteria was as loud as usual, with students laughing and talking in groups. He noticed Todd and his friends at the far end of the room, but this time, they weren't laughing. They were talking in low voices, occasionally glancing over at Jamal. They seemed nervous. Jamal felt a sense of unease settle in his chest. Was it just him, or was the entire school on edge? As Jamal unpacked his lunch, he saw a familiar face walk toward him. Emily. She had been the only one to speak to him since the tension started, and every time they talked, Jamal felt a little more at ease. She had approached him again and again with the same shy smile, and every time, he couldn't help but feel a little better. "Hey, Jamal," she said softly as she sat down across from him. Jamal looked up, surprised. He had expected her to be with her friends, not sitting with him. "Hey, Emily. How's it going?" "Good," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to check in. I know things have been weird lately." Jamal nodded slowly. He was glad she was willing to talk about it. "Yeah, it's been strange. Everyone's acting different. It's like they don't know how to treat me now that the bullying stopped." "I know what you mean," Emily said, glancing over at Todd's group, who were still watching Jamal from the other end of the room. "I've been seeing it too. It's like they're scared of you now, but not in the way they used to be." Jamal sighed and shook his head. "It's not like I want to scare anyone. I just want to be left alone," You know? I don't want people to treat me differently just because of who my father is. Emily's eyes softened. I get it. But, honestly, I think people are starting to realize that you're not what they thought. I think they were all just intimidated by you because you're different, and they didn't know how to handle that. Jamal looked down at his lunch, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. He had always tried to stay true to himself, but it was hard when others saw him only through the lens of his background. He wasn't sure how to change their perceptions, or if he even should. You're probably right, he said after a long pause. But it feels like I can't be myself here. Like I'm being judged by things I didn't even have control over. Emily nodded sympathetically. It's tough. But maybe, by just being you, you can show them that they're wrong. People can be so focused on their own assumptions that they forget to see the person in front of them. Jamal smiled faintly, appreciating her kindness. It was a small comfort, but it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Over the next few days, the tension continued to hang in the air, but Jamal tried not to let it affect him too much. His father's presence loomed in the background, but Jamal wanted to prove that he could stand on his own. He didn't want to rely on his father's power to navigate his life at school. But it wasn't easy. Every time Jamal walked through the halls, he could feel the weight of the stairs, the whispers just beyond his hearing. It was as if the entire school had turned into a pressure cooker, and Jamal was the one in the middle. One day, after school, Jamal decided to take a walk to clear his mind. He didn't know where he was going, just that he needed to get away from everything for a while. As he walked through the quiet streets near his school, he found himself thinking about his father. He didn't know much about what his father did, only that he was powerful and had a reputation that commanded respect. Jamal had always been proud of his father, but he never understood the full extent of his father's world. Now, he was starting to realize just how much power his father had, and it made him uneasy. He didn't want to be part of that world. He just wanted to be a regular teenager, without all the weight of his father's influence hanging over him. As Jamal walked, he thought about Emily's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe the best way to deal with all this was to just be himself. To show everyone that he wasn't defined by where he came from, but by who he was. It was a small idea, but it gave him some comfort as he walked down the empty street. The next day at school, things felt a little different. Todd's group no longer avoided Jamal, but they didn't approach him either. They still looked at him with wary eyes, as though they weren't sure what to make of him. Jamal didn't care. He wasn't interested in their approval anymore. He had his own path to walk, and he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. It was the first time in a while that Jamal had felt a sense of peace. Things weren't perfect, and he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over his own life. And that was enough for now. The weeks passed, and Jamal found himself slipping into a routine. School was still a challenge, but the bullying had stopped, and things were different now. He wasn't sure exactly what had changed, but the tension in the air seemed to have lifted, even if just a little. Todd and his friends still gave him space, and Jamal could tell they were uncomfortable around him. It wasn't like they were afraid of him, but there was an underlying unease, as if they were waiting for something to happen, waiting for Jamal to react or do something unexpected. Jamal didn't want to be a part of their games anymore. He just wanted to focus on his studies and figure out his place at the school. He didn't need anyone's approval, but it was hard not to feel the weight of their judgment every time they looked at him. The school was still divided, with cliques that stuck to their own groups, and Jamal felt like he was stuck in between, not fully belonging to any of them. But he didn't mind as much. He had learned to keep his head down and focus on what was important to him. One afternoon, after class, Jamal walked down the hallway toward his locker. He had just finished a chemistry exam and was eager to get home. As he turned the corner, he was surprised to see Todd standing there, leaning against the wall. Todd wasn't with his usual group of friends, and Jamal wasn't sure if he should stop or keep walking. It was the first time Todd had approached him directly since the incident with the desk. Jamal hesitated for a moment, but then he decided to keep walking. He didn't owe Todd anything. However, just as he passed by, Todd called out to him. "Hey, Jamal." Jamal stopped, turning to face him. There was something different in Todd's voice. It wasn't mocking or cruel like before. It was quieter, almost hesitant. "What do you want, Todd?" Jamal asked, his voice steady. He wasn't sure what to expect from Todd, but he wasn't in the mood for any more games. Todd shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away for a moment before meeting Jamal's gaze. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong." Jamal blinked, taken aback by Todd's apology. He wasn't sure how to respond. He had never expected this from Todd, especially not after everything that had happened. "You're sorry?" Jamal repeated, still processing the words. "Why now?" Todd shrugged, his hands in his pockets. "I guess I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you. My friends and we used to think it was funny, but looking back, it wasn't. It wasn't right. And, well, I don't know how to explain it, but I think I get it now. You didn't deserve any of that." Jamal stood there, unsure of what to say. It wasn't the apology he had imagined, but it was a start. For a moment, he didn't know if he should accept it or walk away. He had spent so long holding onto his anger, thinking he would never forgive Todd for what had happened. But now, standing in front of him, Jamal realized that forgiveness wasn't just about letting Todd off the hook. It was about freeing himself from the weight of the past. "I appreciate the apology," Jamal said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But it's not just about me. You need to change the way you treat people. It's not just about what happened between us. It's about how you treat everyone." Todd nodded, his expression serious. "I get it. I'm trying. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to do better." Jamal watched him for a moment longer, unsure of what to think. Was this real? Was Todd truly trying to make amends? Or was this just another attempt to save face? Jamal couldn't be sure, but he knew that he wasn't the same person who had walked into the school a few weeks ago. He had learned a lot about himself, and he wasn't about to let anyone's actions define him. "All right," Jamal said finally, his voice softening. "But don't expect me to forget. I'm not some charity case. If you really want to change, show it." Todd seemed to relax at that, a small but sincere smile forming on his face. "I will. I promise." With that, Jamal turned and walked away, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure if Todd had truly changed, but at least there was an attempt. He had been given the opportunity to move forward, and that's exactly what he intended to do. As Jamal made his way home that afternoon, he reflected on everything that had happened in the past few weeks. His father's visit to the school, the way his classmates had treated him, the way Todd had finally apologized, it all felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. When he got home, Jamal went straight to his room, where he found his father sitting at the desk, looking over some papers. His father didn't look up as Jamal entered, but he knew Jamal was there. There was an unspoken understanding between them. "How was your day?" his father asked, his voice calm but full of quiet authority. "It was okay," Jamal replied, sitting down on his bed. "Things are better." The bullying stopped. His father didn't react, but Jamal could tell he was paying attention. "And how do you feel about it?" Jamal thought for a moment before responding. "I feel different. It's not just about the bullies anymore. It's about me." I don't want to be known for who you are. I want to be known for who I am. His father nodded slowly, finally looking up from the papers. You've always been your own person, Jamal. You just needed to realize that for yourself. People will try to define you, but only you get to decide who you are. I can protect you from the outside world, but the strength to stand up for yourself, well, that comes from within. Jamal sat back against the bed, taking in his father's words. He had always admired his father's strength, but now he understood it in a new way. It wasn't just about power or influence, it was about being strong enough to stand on your own, even when the world tried to push you down. Jamal had learned that lesson the hard way, but now that he had learned it, nothing could take it away from him. The next day at school, Jamal walked through the halls with his head held high. The students still looked at him, but now there was no fear in his eyes. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He was his own person, and that was enough. Todd and his friends kept their distance, but Jamal no longer felt the need to worry about them. They weren't the ones who defined him anymore. And in that moment, Jamal realized that he had finally taken control of his own story. He wasn't a victim of the school's power dynamics or his father's influence. He was simply Jamal, and that was all he ever needed to be. As the days passed, Jamal found himself adjusting more and more to his new life at school. Things had changed, he had changed, but the school itself still felt like a battleground, filled with cliques, unspoken rules, and lingering tensions. Yet, Jamal no longer felt like an outsider in the same way he once had. The weight of being the new kid was slowly lifting off his shoulders, replaced with something even more powerful, self-assurance. One afternoon, as Jamal sat in the courtyard during lunch, he watched as Todd and his friends sat together at their usual table. They were no longer the same group of bullies they had been when Jamal first arrived at the school. They were quieter, less confident in their mocking, and Jamal knew that they no longer saw him as their target. The moment of tension that had hung between them in the past was gone, replaced by something far less dramatic, indifference. It was strange to him how easily things had shifted. One moment, he had been the subject of mockery, the next he had become a symbol of something else entirely, a symbol of strength, of standing up for oneself. He still didn't fully understand it. Was it because of his father? Was it because of his own decision to not back down? Or had the combination of both made him someone to be respected, even if silently? Whatever it was, Jamal was learning to embrace it. He had stopped looking over his shoulder every time he entered a classroom. He no longer flinched when he heard the whispers behind his back. It was as if he had come to realize that the opinions of others didn't matter as much as the way he saw himself. The more he stood up for himself, the more people began to see him for who he truly was. The idea of being known for who he was, not because of his background or his father, was finally starting to sink in. At lunch one day, Emily came over to him again. It had become a habit now, and Jamal didn't mind. She had been one of the few people who had spoken to him when no one else would, and over time, they had become friends. It was a friendship born not from shared history or social expectations, but from mutual respect. Jamal, Emily began, sitting down across from him with her lunch tray, I've been meaning to tell you something. Jamal raised an eyebrow. What's up? She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You know, I've been watching you these last few weeks, and I think you've really grown. I mean, you came in here, and it wasn't easy. But you didn't let anyone stop you. You didn't back down, even when things got tough. Jamal smiled, grateful for her words, but he was also a little embarrassed. Thanks, Emily. But honestly, I just decided to focus on what I could control. I couldn't let the bullies win. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. And look at you now. You've got people respecting you in ways I don't think they would have before. I think you've earned that respect. Jamal paused for a moment, considering her words. He had never really thought of it that way. He had always focused on getting through each day, surviving the next round of teasing or ridicule. But now, as he looked back on the past few weeks, he realized that he had done more than just survive. He had learned how to stand tall, to face adversity, and to be true to himself despite the pressure around him. "I don't know, Emily," Jamal said slowly, "I guess I just realized something. I can't let other people define who I am. I used to think that if I just played it safe, kept my head down, everything would be okay. But I've learned that doesn't work. You have to be yourself, even if it makes others uncomfortable." Emily smiled at him, her eyes bright. "You've got it. And I think people are starting to notice that about you. The way you carry yourself, it's different. It's like you've stopped trying to fit into their world and started creating your own." Jamal felt a sense of pride swell inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since arriving at the school, he realized that the power to change his life had always been in his hands. It wasn't about being accepted by everyone or fitting into some mold. It was about being unapologetically himself. Later that afternoon, after classes had finished, Jamal found himself walking to the bus stop, deep in thought. He was aware of the students around him, some laughing, some talking, others walking alone, but for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged, not because the school had changed, but because he had. He had stopped seeking approval and started setting the terms for how he would be treated. As Jamal sat on the bus ride home, he thought about the path he had taken to get here. He had endured so much in such a short time, and yet, he was proud of the person he was becoming. It hadn't been easy, but Jamal knew that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had led him to this point. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. At home, Jamal went straight to his room and sat down at his desk, staring out the window. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift as he looked at the world outside. His father had given him a world of opportunities, but it was Jamal who had to decide how to use them. The past had shaped him, yes, but it didn't define him. He had the power to create his own future. As Jamal sat there, lost in his thoughts, he heard a knock on the door. It was his father, standing in the doorway with that familiar, calm expression. He had always been a man of few words, but there was a quiet strength in the way he held himself. "How was school today?" his father asked, stepping into the room. Jamal looked up, meeting his father's gaze. "It was good. Things are better now. I'm getting through it." His father smiled, that same proud, knowing smile he always gave Jamal. "I knew you would. You're stronger than you think." Jamal sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of his father's words. "I think I've figured it out. It's not about letting others control me. It's about standing up for myself, no matter what." His father nodded approvingly. "That's the key. You can't let anyone take away your power, Jamal. Not your classmates, not anyone. You are who you decide to be." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He was no longer the kid who was afraid of the unknown. He was someone who knew his worth, someone who had learned how to navigate the world on his own terms. As he lay down in bed that night, Jamal felt the weight of everything that had happened in the past few months. It had been a hard journey, but it had led him to a place of strength. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that school, uncertain and afraid. Now, he was someone who had faced his fears and come out stronger on the other side. And no matter what came next, Jamal knew that he was ready. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he had the strength to overcome them. Because in the end, Jamal realized that the most important thing was not how others saw him, it was how he saw himself. And he was finally starting to see himself for who he truly was.